Queen Elizabeth II once said something that shattered every fairy tale illusion we've ever held about royal jewelry. Speaking about the Imperial State Crown, that glittering symbol of monarchy containing nearly 3,000 diamonds, she warned, "You can't look down to read the speech, because if you did, your neck would break or it would fall off." Your neck would break. Behind the museum glass at the Tower of London, behind the carefully staged portraits and state occasions, lies a truth we rarely discuss. These priceless treasures, the crowns, the tiaras, the legendary diamonds that have defined dynasties, weren't just symbols of power. They were instruments of physical suffering. They caused migraines. They left fingers swollen and bruised. They were so heavy, so awkward, so genuinely painful that some of the most powerful women in history simply refused to wear them. Because when you discover that Queen Elizabeth II refused to wear priceless Romanov diamonds because they get in the soup, or that an 18-year-old Queen Victoria had to ice her swollen finger after her coronation ring was forced onto the wrong hand, you realize these women were dealing with something far more complex than we ever imagined. Let me take you into the surprisingly human side of royal jewelry. The Imperial State Crown, the weight of duty. Let's start with that crown, the one that could break your neck. The Imperial State Crown sits in the Tower of London today, and tourists photograph it through thick security glass, mesmerized by its beauty. It contains 2,868 diamonds, 17 sapphires, 11 emeralds, 269 pearls, and the Black Prince's ruby, a stone believed to have been worn by King Henry V at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. It's a monument to empire, to continuity, to the weight of history itself. It weighs just over 1 kilogram, 2.3 pounds. That doesn't sound like much, does it? But imagine balancing that weight directly on your skull, not for minutes, but for hours. Imagine being unable to move your head, unable to look down, your neck muscles locked in rigid posture because any deviation could send the crown tumbling or cause genuine physical injury. In 2018, when Queen Elizabeth II was 91 years old, she described what wearing this object actually felt like. Her words were remarkably candid. "You can't look down to read the speech. You have to take the speech up, because if you did, your neck would break or it would fall off." Then she added, with that dry humour that defined her reign, "So there are some disadvantages to crowns, but otherwise they're quite important things." Disadvantages. What a magnificent understatement. The crown had been made for her father, King George VI, whose head was differently proportioned than hers. She acknowledged this with characteristic practicality. "Fortunately, my father and I have about the same sort of shaped head. But once you put it on, it stays." The crown's construction included a leather band with springs designed to distribute weight, but there remained an immutable fact. The wearer's neck muscles had to remain rigid, the posture locked, the gaze perpetually forward. This wasn't a piece of jewelry. It was a physical ordeal disguised as a symbol. Victoria's coronation ring, when tradition inflicts pain. But if Elizabeth's crown reveals the physical burden of monarchy, what happened to Queen Victoria at her coronation in 1838 reveals something even more troubling: the moment when tradition becomes torture. Victoria's coronation was supposed to be the greatest spectacle of the century. Instead, it became a chronicle of chaos and genuine suffering. The ceremony was inadequately rehearsed. The Archbishop of Canterbury seemed perpetually confused. An elderly peer fell on his way to pay homage. One bishop told Victoria the ceremony was over when it was still ongoing. But the moment that caused Victoria genuine physical pain involved a simple object: her coronation ring. The ring was exquisitely crafted, an octagonal sapphire surrounded by rubies forming a cross, framed by 20 cushion-shaped diamonds. It was made by the royal goldsmiths Rundle, Bridge and Rundle, following centuries of tradition. But the craftsmen had made a critical error. They misinterpreted the instruction to make the ring for the fourth finger, confusing the medieval counting system where the thumb was the first digit. They sized it for Victoria's pinky finger. During the ceremony, Victoria tried to insist the Archbishop place it on her pinky, the only finger it would fit. The Archbishop refused. Duty, tradition, and 500 years of precedent demanded the coronation ring go on the ring finger. He forced it on. The pain was immediate and intense. In her diary, Victoria recorded the moment with remarkable candor. The Archbishop had, most awkwardly, put the ring on the wrong finger, and the consequence was that I had the greatest difficulty to take it off again, which I at last did with great pain. She was forced to ice her hand after the 5-hour ceremony. An attendee named Greville recorded that Victoria needed to soak her swollen finger in ice water to remove the ring. Yet despite this ordeal, Victoria's summary of her coronation day remained characteristically resilient. The enthusiasm, affection and loyalty were really touching, and I shall remember this day as the proudest of my life. The ring still exists in the crown jewels at the Tower of London, inscribed with Queen Victoria's Coronation Ring 1838. It represents not the triumph of regalia, but the triumph of an 18-year-old woman's dignity in the face of a badly planned ceremony and an inflexible tradition. Diamonds in the soup, when priceless becomes impractical. Now let me tell you about the piece that never appeared in public for 70 years, and the reason why is so wonderfully, perfectly human. In 1928, Queen Mary purchased a spectacular diamond sautoir, a long necklace made from diamonds sourced from the legendary Romanov collection. These weren't just any diamonds. They had belonged to Russian imperial courts before the revolution scattered them across Europe. Queen Mary, famous for her more is more philosophy, had them reset into a versatile piece that could be worn as a long chain, divided into shorter necklaces, or converted into bracelets. When Queen Mary died in 1953, this historically significant, extraordinarily valuable piece passed to her granddaughter, the newly crowned Queen Elizabeth II. Elizabeth never wore it, not once, not in 70 years. She never even loaned it to anyone else, despite being notably generous with other pieces from her collection. The diamonds that had survived revolution crossed continents and represented one of the most dramatic redistributions of wealth in modern history. They sat in darkness. Why? According to Sir Hugh Roberts, curator of the Royal Collection, Queen Elizabeth II found these long, swinging chains incredibly bothersome. The Queen reportedly explained her distaste with a comment that has become perhaps the most revealing thing any monarch has ever said about royal jewellery. The diamonds get in the soup. Think about that for a moment. Here was a woman positioned at the apex of global power, surrounded by the accumulated wealth of centuries, and she was worried about the same thing that would concern any of us, the simple desire to eat dinner without dipping priceless gems into the consommé. The Queen also noted that a tall Cartier tiara felt like it was going to fall in the soup at dinner. Rather than preserve it as a museum piece, she had it dismantled, keeping only the individual rose brooches that could be worn without similar risks. This is where the fairy tale collides with reality. The most powerful woman in the world making jewelry decisions based on whether she could comfortably eat her dinner. The pudding crown, when symbols collapse. From soup we turn to pudding, and another moment when Victoria's relationship with her regalia took a humiliating turn. Victoria's Imperial State Crown was an architectural marvel, gold set with over 3,000 diamonds, hundreds of pearls, sapphires, emeralds, rubies, and the Black Prince's ruby. It weighed 39.25 troy ounces, heavy enough that wearing it required genuine physical endurance. Victoria wore it at her coronation and then at the state opening of Parliament in 1845. As the Duke of Argyll processed through Parliament carrying the crown on its ceremonial cushion, the heavy object shifted. It fell. When the frame hit the ground, it didn't shatter dramatically. It crushed inward, crumpling under the weight of its own gems. Victoria's description of the damage, recorded in her diary, combined royal dignity with vivid observation. The crown looked like a pudding that had sat down. A pudding. Soft, malformed, collapsed. The rigid symbol of power reduced to something you'd serve at dessert. The frame was repaired, but Victoria never wore the crown again at state openings. She rarely wore it in formal portraits. Later in life, after Prince Albert's death in 1861, she commissioned the small diamond crown, a lighter, more modest piece specifically designed to be worn over her widow's cap. The original 1838 crown's design became the template for all subsequent Imperial State Crowns, but Victoria's personal relationship with it had been permanently damaged by that moment when it collapsed like a pudding. And here's the final indignity. By the time of King George V's state funeral procession in 1936, the elderly crown was failing again. The top cross containing Edward the Confessor's sapphire actually fell off and bounced down the street during the funeral procession. Even the most sacred symbols of monarchy eventually fall apart. Diana's Spencer tiara, the headache behind the icon. When Princess Diana emerged from St. Paul's Cathedral on July 29, 1981, wearing her family's Spencer tiara, 750 million people watched. The tiara, with its intricate garland design featuring heart-shaped motifs flanked by scrolls and diamond flowers, became instantly iconic. What the cameras didn't capture was what happened after the ceremony. Diana had a cracking headache after hours of wearing the heavy tiara. The piece was a 19th century heirloom, originally created in 1767, then remodeled and expanded by Garrard in 1937. It wasn't light. And according to royal hairdresser Sam McKnight, who worked extensively with Diana, tiaras often gave Diana headaches. But here's what makes Diana's story particularly poignant. She actually chose the Spencer tiara over alternatives from the royal collection specifically because it was lighter. The Queen had offered her the famous Lover's Knot tiara, one of the most spectacular pieces in the crown jewels. Diana turned it down, not out of sentiment alone, because the lighter piece was more wearable. Throughout her marriage and her years as Princess of Wales, Diana wore the Spencer tiara repeatedly to state banquets, white tie affairs, world tours. In photographs, it appears as an essential element of her identity, the ultimate image of fairy tale royalty. Behind the scenes, she was managing chronic headaches to maintain that image. When Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, the tiara was returned to the Spencer family vaults. It didn't appear in public again until 2018, when it was worn by Lady Celia McCorquodale for her wedding. It remains a private family heirloom, never offered to Kate Middleton or Meghan Markle. The image of Diana in the tiara at St. Paul's Cathedral has defined how the world understands it. But the piece itself has returned to private life, away from the pressure of state occasions and the weight of international scrutiny. The fairy tale came with literal headaches, and Diana bore them with grace. The Lover's Knot tiara, beauty's painful legacy. That brings us to the piece Diana rejected, the Lover's Knot tiara, and the painful legacy it carried. Queen Mary commissioned this tiara from Garrard in 1913, creating one of the most famous pieces of the 20th century. Made of diamonds and 19 hanging pearls set in silver and gold, valued between £2 and £3 million, it represents the height of Edwardian jewellery design. The tiara passed to Queen Elizabeth II, who wore it occasionally, though not with the regularity one might expect. When Diana turned it down for her wedding, she had good reason. The piece was heavy, genuinely, painfully heavy. Fashion expert Miranda Holder confirmed in interviews that Diana experienced terrible headaches from wearing the lover's knot tiara. The piece, though exquisite, caused physical pain during extended wear. This raises a question we rarely ask. What price did Diana pay for those iconic images? When Diana and Charles divorced, the tiara was returned to the royal collection. It wasn't worn publicly again until 2015, when Kate Middleton took it out for a reception at Buckingham Palace, some 19 years after Diana had last worn it. Since then, Kate has worn the tiara more frequently than any other piece in the collection, with visible comfort and grace. Yet the piece retains its association with pain as a kind of footnote to Diana's experience. The lover's knot tiara was made in 1914 during the height of Edwardian luxury, just months before the assassination in Sarajevo that would precipitate World War I. The piece embodies a historical moment, the last outpouring of pre-war aristocratic excess, frozen in platinum and pearls. That such a piece, created in a moment of imperial confidence, would eventually be worn by a woman experiencing the most intense scrutiny and pressure of modern celebrity, adds a layer of historical irony to its significance. Queen Alexandra's mystery, paste or practicality. And now, let me share with you one of the most intriguing mysteries in royal jewelry history, a story that asks whether a queen might have chosen comfort over authenticity at the most sacred moment of her life. In 1902, Queen Alexandra, wife of King Edward VII, was crowned at Westminster Abbey. The ceremony included one of the most elaborate coronation crowns ever made for a queen consort. On her crown sat the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond, along with numerous other precious stones arranged in intricate patterns befitting the height of Edwardian opulence. But royal jewellery expert Susie Menkes has raised a provocative question. Upon close examination of the actual crown now held at the Tower of London, the placement of stones appears unusual. While the Koh-i-Noor was definitely removed at some point and replaced with a crystal version, the way the other stones are arranged would have made it extremely difficult for jewelers to remove them without damaging the frame, suggesting they may never have been removed. Could it be that Queen Alexandra, famous for her independent spirit and her reported declaration, "I shall wear exactly what I like, basta. Enough of this nonsense," chose to be crowned in a lightweight crown adorned with paste rather than real stones? The theory remains unproven, but it fits with what we know of Alexandra's personality and her pragmatism about her own body. She had a meeting with the Archbishop before the coronation specifically to discuss how the anointing oil would interact with her toupee. She wore a hairpiece to conceal thinning hair. She was clearly someone willing to negotiate royal tradition when it suited her comfort. Would she have chosen to wear a lighter crown to spare herself hours of discomfort? The evidence is circumstantial, but it's tantalizing. It was, perhaps, the most logical choice available to her. The human cost of symbols. So what do we learn from the jewelry queens avoided wearing? We learn that the most glittering symbols of power came with a price that had nothing to do with money. They came with migraines and swollen fingers. They came with the indignity of worrying about diamonds falling into soup. They came with the choice between comfort and duty, between personal preference and centuries of tradition. Queen Elizabeth II wore what worked, her famous 3-strand pearl necklace given to her by her father, which she wore nearly every day for 70 years. Simple, elegant, lightweight, and profoundly meaningful. It was the piece that revealed who she actually was, rather than who tradition suggested she should be. And that's the real story of royal jewelry. Not the fairy tale of effortless glamour, but the reality of women negotiating with the weight of history, one painful piece at a time. Which story surprised you most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this glimpse behind the royal vaults as fascinating as I did, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more hidden stories waiting to be told. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time.